I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Today is Monday, October 24th, 2022. And first of all, hi to my colleagues in community, Diana Hawkins and Dee Phillipps. Both of them are my friends and collaborators through the Hawthorne Neighborhood Council. We call this neighbor governance from the neighborhood level. And the Hawthorne Neighborhood Association Council has been doing the Hawthorne Huddle for almost 30 years now, Diana?
27. That's what we're doing. 20 years. Yep, 27.
And that's what it's all about, keeping neighborhoods and communities together. So thank you, Diana. Thank you, Dee, for your steadfast attention to the needs of our community and for building neighborhoods that work for our people. Thank you both. Today, we are focusing as much as we can on the political decisions that are ahead of us. Pleased to have candidate for Hennepin County Attorney back with us again, Moriarty. Let's start with a video from her website, sort of explaining her value proposition. After her, we're going to talk to Cedrick Frazier. A good conversation and more to follow as well.
My name is Mary Moriarty, and I'm running for Hennepin County Attorney in 2022. I know that many in our community are struggling with trauma from the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, and the turmoil surrounding our community. More than ever, I believe we need to be able to trust that those in charge of our institutions have the experience, the vision, and the courage to create meaningful, lasting change. That's why I'm running. You may know me as Hennepin County's Chief Public Defender. I served in that role for 6 years after trying cases for over 2 decades as a public defender. As chief, I fought to bring justice, fairness, and equity to a court system that is too often unfair and unjust, especially towards poor people and people of color. Now I want to bring that fight for justice to the role of Hennepin County's lead prosecutor. I care deeply about the public's safety and well-being. Whether you live in North Minneapolis, Richfield, or Maple Grove, you deserve to feel safe. Many do not, however, because our costly criminal justice system resists progress and continues to function in the same unaccountable way it has for decades. Trust in the Hennepin County Attorney has eroded, but I will work tirelessly to restore that trust by being transparent, accountable, and accessible to the community. I will listen with an open mind and heart to understand what the public needs to feel safe. My office will hold local police departments accountable by acting when we see officers violate policy or constitutional rights. Under my leadership, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office could be a powerful partner in the move towards a more equitable and just court system. I hope you will vote for me in November 2022.
Well, there you have it. Mary Moriarty, good to see you. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And thank you for having me on your show. It's good to see you.
Welcome back. You know, the role you're running for, the role you play currently, have played, has been critical and important. So I want to make sure that we have a chance to present your voice, your vision, your views to the people that might be watching and reading the newspaper reports of this interview. You've talked about, in a sense, indicting the county for its failure. What did you mean about what the county has done to lose the trust of the people?
Right. So I was referring to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, which has run pretty much the same way for decades and implementing and continuing the same failed policies that have not kept us safe. The county attorney's office hasn't kept up with the science of adolescent brain development, data. It hasn't kept appropriate data on racial disparities and gender disparities.
And it just needs to come into this century. And that's what I will do as Hennepin County Attorney. So my focus is not on repeating the same failed policies of the past, but bringing new policies in that are data-based and research-based and based on science that we know will keep us safe.
Break that out for me. What do you mean? For example, data-based, research-based,
Yes.
New science.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about adolescent brain development. We know that youth adolescents, actually, brains are continuing to develop past the age of 25. And we know that youth are susceptible to being impulsive and peer pressure, and that they do things that they will age out of. Yet we have not approached the youth that enter into the system in that way, and giving them trauma-informed services, mental health services, and substance use services, and anything that they need that will keep them from coming in the system and just circulating in and out of the system. In terms of data, we know, for instance, that 40% of the people who go to prison come back out and commit a new felony. We know that a third of the people who are put on probation in Hennepin County commit a new felony within 3 years. So there's plenty of data that tells us that what we're doing isn't working. And so what I will do is be looking at that data. And if it isn't working, we're going to do something different. In terms of data as well, the county attorney's office does have a data dashboard, but it doesn't capture some essential decisions. For instance, the county attorney determines who to charge, who not to charge, what to charge them with, what to offer them. Essentially, they control somebody's trajectory, whether they actually get into the system and what happens to them in the system. There's a study out of Wisconsin that showed that prosecutors offered white people who were accused of crimes better offers than Black people. We don't have that kind of data. So what I will keep is data that looks at.
Do you think we have the same story? Let me ask you that. We don't have the data, but do you feel the story is the same? Whites get better deals than Blacks.
Yes, I do. I feel that way as somebody who's been a public defender for 31 years. I feel that way because we know that these are subjective decisions and that everyone has unconscious bias. Sometimes it isn't unconscious, but we know everybody has unconscious bias. So if you are making decisions, having that bias, we know that your decisions are probably going to perpetuate racial disparities. So I believe that to be the case. We'll keep data on it, and I will put in place policies that will prevent that from happening.
Let me give you a complicated question or scenario to have you respond to. I know about it because it affects, I won't mention any names, but the family of one of my former employees. A young person was accused of murder, killing someone. The person who was accused and convicted was documented as a victim or suffering from fetal alcohol syndrome. So a history of behavior challenges directly related to, in a documented fashion, the fetal alcohol syndrome, and was in a group of kids that the father of this young man says bullied this young man, and in their youthful, not, I won't call it youthful, in their illegal activity of robbing somebody, killed someone. So what do you do? And the father's argument to the public, and he's approached probably you and others, you might know the case, saying that he feels that the system is inattentive, insensitive to the special situation of his son, that the son has been in jail now for like 15 years or 12 years, I think, so far, but went in and was committed and tried as an adult when he was a child, but adult with special situations. So what do you do with that? How do you handle that kind of prosecution or defense?
And I would start before that kind of offense happens. And that's what I mentioned, that we are failing our youth. So as a public defender, I represented many people, youth, adults, but I would look at their history and I would see trauma after trauma, victimization after victimization, fetal alcohol syndrome, all of those kinds of things, traumatic brain injuries. And I would often say to myself, if we had intervened early on with this person, they probably wouldn't be sitting next to me. So a big key to my approach is approaching youth where they're at when they come into the system, and even before that, by partnering with schools, because that's a key pipeline here. And that's why I have the endorsements of many school board members, because I've really reached out because I think that link is important. But we have to try to treat youth early on before they get involved in behavior that involves violence. But once they do, we also have to look at the individual case. And I mentioned before that adolescent brain development tells us that youth are susceptible to peer pressure. We've seen many cases where youth are in a group and one youth, or some, maybe even an adult, has an idea to do something violent, for instance. Mm-hmm. And yet the youth just doesn't, the youth that are there don't have the maturity at that point to say no. We've seen that happen. And so what I believe is we have to look at those individuals as an individual and look at what is in the best interest of the public safety of the people of Hennepin County. And in an individual case, if this particular youth wasn't directly, or didn't shoot somebody, was kind of along for the ride, we need to treat that youth differently than we do somebody who actually had a gun and initiated that and caused the person to be killed. And I'll mention one case that has always struck me, a young man named Kevin Reese. You probably know him. He was indicted for felony first-degree murder because he was going along on a drug deal, and the person he was with had a gun and ended up shooting the person who was going to sell them drugs. This county attorney's office prosecuted him, indicted him for first-degree felony murder, which meant he, as a teenager, was supposed to spend the rest of his life in prison. He ended up pleading to second-degree felony murder. He spent 22 years in prison. Now, as a teenager, and I look at him and I think I never would have indicted him for felony murder. He didn't have a gun. He didn't shoot this person. There was no reason, no public safety reason, no reason at all that Kevin Reese needed to be in prison. So it is incredibly important, as I said, to intervene early on, and then to look at the individual and see what role they may or may not have played in an individual crime, and then take that into consideration when you're holding that person accountable.
At the same time, I can tell you that people in my neighborhood feel like they need to be protected, and that people that are a danger to themselves and to neighborhoods and the community need to be off the streets and need to be in jail. It's Diana, you're shaking your head, but that's what we hear all the time.
It reminds me of the two babies. We just had these 2 3-year-olds. One got beat to death, another one got shot the other day and yesterday, I believe, in North Minneapolis. I mean, this is just terrible. You know how I feel about this. We definitely need to get this up off the streets. Definitely. Someone got shot right outside front of my house the other night. I mean, teenagers.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that people who commit violent crimes need to be held accountable. And I also do a lot of door knocking in North Minneapolis, and I listen to what people have to say. And I think it's important to understand that North Minneapolis, let me say the Black community in general, is not a monolith, and people have different views. And I know a strong view is, I would like my child to be able to walk to school or walk to the park without being shot. I would like my child to be able to bounce on a trampoline without getting shot. We had 3 Black children shot in the head last summer, and there wasn't the response that I would hope for or expect. So I am very much, one of my priorities is about gun violence, because we need to do something desperately about gun violence, and also holding people accountable. So I understand that. In terms of youth, we closed the county homeschool, but in my opinion, the issue there was we didn't have other alternatives for youth when they did that. And some of those alternatives need to be where youth aren't safe at their home or in the community, and they need to be getting services, but with a level of supervision that doesn't allow them to be harming others while we're giving them what they need. So yes, I strongly believe in holding people accountable. The gun violence, the shootings are really scary. And we can't continue to ignore those children and adults. I've gone to a number of funerals, by the way, I have had clients shot and killed. I have gone to the vigils for children who've been shot and killed. And I've gone to marches and vigils for people who've been the victims of police violence. And the one thing everybody has in common is nobody wants to be there. We need to start preventing all of this kind of violence so that everybody can live in a safe community.
Listen, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to hang out. I want to bring Cedrick Frazier in. He's running, rerunning for state representative. Representative Frazier, how you doing?
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. Take a minute, jump right in, and talk about your candidacy, what you've done, and what you want to do, why you're seeking continued support of voters in your district.
Well, I'm running for District 43A, which is covers the cities of New Hope and Crystal. I would be running to come in for a second term. My first term, I was the vice chair of the Public Safety, Criminal Justice Reform Finance Committee, which deals a lot with the issues that you were just speaking about with candidate Mary Moriarty. One of the big things I focused on during my first term was resources to put into our community to establish intervention and prevention programs. I think what Mary Moriarty said is exactly right. It hits it right on the head. If we have programs in place that can intervene to prevent our kids or even adults from getting into situations that are going to get them engaged in the criminal justice system before that happens, that's the most important way to create and maintain safe communities. What I always tell folks is when you take a look at communities that are unsafe, or you're seeing an overrepresentation of violence or being over-policed, what you see is a lack of resources and a lack of investment in those particular communities. When you look at communities that have tons of resources and investment, you don't see those same type of issues of violence happening in those communities. And also what you don't see is you don't see a police squad car on every corner. You don't see cars, police heavy presence. And you don't see that because you don't need to see a heavy police presence, because resources are there for the folks that live in those communities, for the families, for the young people, to provide them with resources so that they're doing things that are positive and not getting them engaged in the criminal justice system and not out engaged in any things that are terms of violent crime. So I'm running to keep working on those issues and to make sure that all communities, no matter what zip code, no matter what race or what your background is, that your communities are safe, because I think that's important. I do it because I want my kids to have a safe community. I want them to be able to take walks to school or walks to the park and not to have any fear of that. But also I want them to be in their schools and not to have fear that someone's going to come in with a gun and shoot the school up. Those things are all important. Which
happened this morning, I think, in St. Louis again.
That's right.
School shooting in St. Louis, unfortunately, at least one person dead and several shot. Talk about, I want you both, Mary Moriarty and Cedrick Frazier, to tell your personal stories, your personal background. I'm going to start with you, Representative Frazier, because both of you guys are lawyers, I believe, and you've got phenomenal academic careers and work careers. So I want to share that with our viewers and listeners. Representative?
So my background, I born and raised Chicago, Illinois, and I always a community named Inglewood, so right in the heart of the city. And that's one of the things that colors my perspective or gives me perspective when I'm talking about community safety. I grew up in a neighborhood that was absolutely not safe when you look at the data. You know, when I graduated high school, Chicago had one of the highest murder rates in the country. So when I talk about community safety
in the world, go ahead.
Probably, yeah. So when I talk about, and how you know this, so when I talk about community safety and public safety, I'm coming from a perspective where I absolutely don't want individuals in the community that are going to be causing harm to themselves or other people in the community. In no way am I saying that I want that to happen. I don't want that to happen because I grew up in an environment just like that. And no one in this country, no one particularly in the state of Minnesota, should have to grow up in a community like that. So that's the work that I'm doing. I was fortunate. Education is the foundational thing that has put me in this position that I am now. I was fortunate to graduate high school in Chicago, come to the University of Minnesota Morris, earn a degree in psychology. I went on to the Minnesota State in Mankato and earned a master's degree in urban and regional studies with a focus on local government management. And I went on to William Mitchell School of Law to earn my Juris Doctorate. And I went on to, my initial practice was as a public defender in Hennepin County, which is where I met Mary Moriarty. She was one of the attorneys as part of my team, and she was also a great mentor while I was there.
Mary, tell your story, your background.
Yeah, I grew up in small town, greater Minnesota, New Ulm. And I once looked up the census on it, and I believe it was 98.7% white. And so I grew up really without interacting with people of other races, other cultures, which I think many people do in Minnesota who grow up in greater Minnesota. My mother got a divorce, and we lived in a trailer park in Grand Rapids. She was an English teacher, and then she married a lawyer. And so I saw a lot of people treat my family very different because of, we went from a single mom to a family with a lawyer. And so there are a number of ways I really recognize my privilege. I went to Macalester. I went to the University of Minnesota Law School, so I'm a lifelong Minnesotan. But my work at the Public Defender's Office really, really showed me racial disparities and the difficulty that we have in Minnesota, even talking about race and structural racism, how structural racism has deprived Black and brown people of the opportunity to build wealth. But I also I taught a lot. I've taught at Harvard. I've taught students who wanted to be public defenders and prosecutors. But I also did a lot of teaching in the South. So Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi. And I often, when I give presentations on race, I say to people, where do you think the two most difficult places are to talk about race? And usually people will say someplace in the South. And I respond with Minneapolis and Seattle. Because we tend to think of ourselves, and in some ways we are very progressive, but we are also among the bottom of states in terms of income, home ownership, health disparities. And in the criminal system, although we have among the lowest incarceration rates in the country, if you look within those rates, they're among the highest racial disparities. So I have worked really hard to educate myself about systemic racism and to really take a stand, which I did as chief public defender, to talk about these issues that were really impacting our communities. So my growing up in greater Minnesota really helped me see what was happening in terms of Minnesota. Minnesota is among the 10 best places to live on many measures for white people, but not so for Black and brown. And I want to change that using this role as Hennepin County Attorney as a place to advocate for more resources to address root causes as well.
Let me ask you both from a policy point of view, how do you see playing out policy and also enforcement, the emergence of both medical and ultimately recreational marijuana use in Minnesota? That's a big issue. I think the handwriting on the wall is that it's a question of time before our laws change. And if that happens, what's going to happen to people that have been tried and convicted for possession, use, selling of something that had been illegal, but that no longer is, and that the society looks at differently from before? What do we do? How do we use that as a case study for looking differently at the impact of how the society has treated Black and brown people who are in violation, but how it treats white people differently?
Well, I'll jump in here first, Mary. So to that question, we passed last session a year ago. We passed a cannabis recreational use bill off the DFL House floor, and then it stalled. The Senate, the Republican Senate, didn't take it up at all. That bill had in there the policies that you're referring to. We were going to expunge the criminal background records of those that were being charged with what now would be legal if that once that bill would get signed into law. We also were establishing opportunities for individuals to be able to go into the enterprising side, the entrepreneurial side of cannabis recreational selling as well. And we wanted to make sure that we gave opportunities to those that have been harmed by the inequitable policies that have been put in place for so many years, for decades. And the reason this is something that is really important to me is because, again, I grew up in Chicago, and I recall what it was like when the crack epidemic came into the community and how that changed the dynamics of families due to bringing people into the criminal justice system and breaking up homes, breaking up families, and just doing overall harm. The war on drug how much harm it did on the Black and brown community. And the war on drugs, including the war on marijuana, has done the same thing. And these policies put in place would be a way to rectify those things. And also moving forward, make sure that the same opportunities will be had by the communities that have been harmed the most by those inequitable policies. And what we know, looking at the data in other states that already have taken a step to make recreational use legal, we're not seeing a super uptick in crime in those areas. We're not seeing an overuse of people being pulled over that are using and then driving, operating vehicles. The data is not seeing that. What we are seeing is a tremendous uptick in tax increases in turn from the sale of those resources, and what we can use those taxes for in a positive way to invest back in those communities. Because as I mentioned before, many of those communities have largely been uninvested in. They've been over policed, they've been over incarcerated, they've been overly involved in the criminal justice system, but they've been underinvested in. And we can use some of those new tax dollars to invest in those communities and create programs that are going to allow those individuals from those communities to achieve the best life possible.
Mary, you speak to the same thing from your positions, both as a defender, but also as a prosecutor coming up. What are the dynamics? Go ahead.
I had a front row seat as chief public defender into how the war on drugs continued, and that was the downtown marijuana sting that some of you might remember. The Minneapolis Police Department was walking up to people in downtown Minneapolis, asking them specifically for weed. And so many of the people that they asked had 2 grams, 10 grams. And if you have 42.5 grams or less in Minnesota, it's just a ticket. It isn't even a misdemeanor. But by virtue of the police officers asking people to sell a personal amount use, they were then going to the county attorney's office and having those people charged with felony drug sale. And so at the public defender's office, we picked up 47 of those cases, and we discovered that 46 of those clients were Black. We approached the county attorney's office and said, hey, there's a problem here. And they were not interested in that. I went to the mayor and I showed him some of the police reports and said, hey, you ran on a platform of legalization of marijuana. And he then put a stop to those stings. But I remember during the press conference, somebody from a news station saying to me, but weren't these people actually guilty of selling drugs? And I said, I want you to think about this. And like I just told you, I went to McAllister. I was very privileged to go there. Can you imagine undercover police officers going on campus at McAllister and asking students to sell them weed? And then forwarding those cases to the county attorney and having those students charged with felony drug sale? What would happen? I saw the wheels turning. She's like, oh. So that's a discretion. The county attorney's office had the discretion to say, we are not going to charge these cases, but they didn't. And so as county attorney, I will make sure we're not charging those cases. We will not charge small amounts or possession amounts of marijuana. I know the county attorney's office says that they don't do that now, but I just talked to a public defender 2 nights ago who said he had 10 cases of marijuana possession on his caseload. And so we need to stop criminalizing a drug for Black and brown people that we know is essentially legal if you are white. And I also will partner with Representative Frazier and others to make sure that we remove these convictions and expunge the records of people who have been convicted, because convictions prevent you from getting housing and jobs. and there's such a barrier for somebody to try to come back and lead the productive life they want to lead.
What do you both think about the ravishing impact of the fentanyl abuse availability? That's another element of this. We've had a number of discussions with the Northside Urban Coalition and Hawthorne Huddle about the impact, the presence of fentanyl use and abuse. You see it walking down West Broadway. People in the bus shelters, bent over, knocked out, actually using drugs in public. And it's frightening. And Charlie Adams, in a recent meeting, this is the precinct inspector for 4th Precinct, said he's not going to be charging users, but the key for him is to go after sellers. the supply line. What are your thoughts on that, on the impact of it, and what do we do? How do we move our community and our society towards viewing this as a medical and health issue more than a crime issue? Though I'm sure both things are there. Representative, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it is an issue. We're seeing a huge impact of this. We're losing a lot of lives to it. We actually had a bill that would have addressed this in the past legislative session. Again, we passed it out of the DFL House. It's stalled in our Republican colleagues on the Senate side. But we had something to deal with sales, and we put millions of dollars in resources in to deal with the health side of it, because we do believe it should be treated as a public health crisis. As you mentioned earlier, many of these folks are just users. Some of these individuals are not aware that the drug that they're actually using is being laced with fentanyl. These people don't want to die when they take the drug. They're looking for a high. They're not looking to lose their life when they take this drug. And with the way that these drugs are being laced with fentanyl, we really need to get at the individuals that are doing that. I think there is a way to do that, to make things safer for those that are dealing in that way and putting things that are going to be harmful to users in there, and also to deal with the addiction that is out there of the user. And we did pass legislation to deal with that last session. And again, it was stalled by our Republican colleagues in the Senate side. So we'll keep working to do that, because I think it's the best thing to do. It creates safer communities. Again, it creates safer communities for all Minnesotans, but it also will deal with this as the way it should be dealt with. And that is as a public health crisis.
Mary?
And I've seen exactly what you're talking about walking down Broadway myself. And so I've put a lot of thought into it. I also had a sister who died of an accidental overdose. She had a mental health condition and was on some medications and drank. And I was in charge of the behavioral health committee in Hennepin County, which looked at options for people with substance use and mental health. So I have a very big interest in this. And what I believe is, as the representative said, is we have to approach this from a public health perspective. People who are using drugs are doing it to numb themselves, especially now with the pandemic, with everything that's going on. And many people don't have access to healthcare. They don't have access to doctors who can prescribe drugs. And as the representative said, nobody wants to die. I do think that we need to make fentanyl testing strips available to people so that they can test what they're getting to make sure that it doesn't have fentanyl in it. We also need to understand that there are people, there isn't a distinct line between those people who use and those people who sell. We know that a lot of people sell and use. And so we do have to put together services for people who are struggling with addiction. This is all over the country, but it is decimating some of our communities. We need to have more culturally specific treatment programs, more trauma-based treatment programs, and get people into those, hopefully instead of the criminal legal system.
Listen, thank you both for this time. Stick around as long as you can. We're here for an hour. I want to bring in Allison O'Toole, who's both a friend and a leader in government and now in the non-governmental sector, to talk about work in the food shelf, food space. Big problems, but also opportunities. And she's one that's leading that discussion through Second Harvest. Allison, good afternoon. Welcome to the conversation. How are you?
So good to see you, Al, and thanks so much for having me. It's always a privilege.
Well, jump right in and talk about Second Harvest 101. What's the mission, the vision, and the strategy for addressing food for people that are in need in our state?
Yeah, you got it. Thanks, Al. So Second Harvest Heartland is one of the largest food banks in the country, based right here in the Twin Cities. And our mission is to end hunger together. And so, Al, you've known me for a long time. I have never been able to do any of my work without a lot of partners around us. I think we're always better together. And that is certainly core to what we do at Second Harvest Heartland. So when you think about what we do as a food bank, so we're part of the Feeding America network. We're one of 200 across the country. Again, we're one of the biggest in the country. We're usually ranked about third. That makes sense when you think about our state, and we're an ag state, and we have a lot of large food companies here that help in this. but we're really the backbone to the Hunger Relief Network. And so if you think about your local food shelves, and we work with so many across the state, but especially in our beloved city, they're really the front lines in this fight. So what we do is we source, repack, and distribute more than 100 million pounds of food every year. And we send all that food to the front lines. So you think about Shiloh Care's food shelf in North Minneapolis, which is a great partner. Camden Promise, so many outlets there. But those are really the folks that are the front lines and working in communities to make sure that people have the resources they need to get on to better days. So that's sort of a nutshell. And Al, I've got so much to say about what we're doing and maybe a challenge to all of us for the future too. Yeah. Okay. Well,
that's some data, right? Some reports to share.
Oh yeah. And I'll go through some stats lately. You know, I've been in this job for almost 4 years. I was there about 10 or 11 months before the pandemic hit. I'm really thankful for that time, but we've been off to the races since. And when you think about all this community has been through in the last 2.5 or 3 years, I thought we had seen the worst of it in terms of need. We haven't. We are in that right now. The need we see in our communities across our service area, but across the country, is higher than at this time in 2020. And I can't even believe I say that, Al. It's been a heck of a few years for all of us and for this community. And our neighbors are struggling and still struggling. And you think about what happened in 2020, a lot of different people came to the table to help people. And I always say, like, you can think whatever you want about all that stimulus money that came through. A lot of those programs worked out. And so when you think about, I am a huge proponent of the SNAP program, otherwise known as food stamps. That helps families. And so I will carry that torch as long as anyone lets me. Those enhanced benefits worked and helped families make ends meet. The enhanced child tax credit had an almost immediate impact on child poverty, 40% reduction, literally almost overnight, Al. And so when people were working together and coming to the table to really address this tsunami of need that we saw because of the pandemic, I'd love to take some of these conversations out of the politics and really talk about what worked, because some of those things really worked. And now what's different, Al, is that you've got sky high inflation and consumer prices, really tight supply chains, wages have not kept up. And so families are struggling. And all of those supports, or the vast majority, are gone. And so we're seeing our partners, the food shelves that we get to work with, are seeing an increase of 30% or more in visits to their food shelves. Throughout the pandemic, we've been confronted with the fact that communities of color face at least twice the rates of hunger than their white neighbors do. And for Black Minnesotans and Hispanic Minnesotans, it's way higher than that. I feel like it's our responsibility at Second Harvest Heartland to join this community and ending that. And I'm raising money and investing, strategically investing those resources to do just that. But when we think about, I think we're all feeling this in different ways. I see my grocery bill go up, but I haven't had to make very many hard choices. Right. But there are tons, more families than ever having to make really hard choices. And we always know that the food budget is the first to be compromised. So people are paying their rent, their car payments so they can keep their job and get to work. They're paying gas to fill their car up, and they're compromising their food budget. And so we're seeing it just, I can't believe I keep saying it, but it is worse than it's ever been. And what I think is that this community has to, this community is stuck by us at Second Harvest Heartland for the last few years. We need everyone to stay in the game with us. because we have to figure this out.
You say you want to talk about this without the impact and influence of politics. Really, it's difficult, Allison.
I know.
We're sitting in a state that has a $9 billion surplus that could help a lot of people do a lot of things. And so I want to kind of open this conversation up, if my other colleagues and guests don't mind. And I'll ask, I know you're all running, you, Mary, and Cedrick are running for office, but and you should always be looking for votes, and that's fine. But this is a chance to talk about these persistent problems and what solutions we can come up with at the county level, for the prosecutor's office, and at the state level. And also, you're a former department head in state government, Allison, and now you're in the NGO sector. Let's talk about the big picture here. What do we do in Minnesota to make our state more livable? We've got some great stories in terms of the general conditions for most, and I'll put that, white Minnesotans, but what's happening with Black and brown is shameful, and it's persistent, and it's not necessary. So jump in, guys. Mary, Cedrick, and Allison, let's flow with this.
Well, Allison, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this should be something that politics shouldn't get in the way of creating policies and programs that are making the lives of people better. And I think that's exactly what those stimulus programs did when we were in a height of the pandemic, when we really were uncertain about what was going to happen. And those were bipartisan. I mean, both parties said this is what we need to do right now to take care of people. Unfortunately, as we continue to be polarized and more partisan, they've ended those programs. And I myself personally, I saw how much they work. I was out at the food shelves when we had to stay at home orders, and I saw how many people came in and needed those resources. And I was thankful that we had the resources coming in to the churches and the nonprofit communities that were able to provide those resources for them. I live just down the street from a food shelf, and I drive by. I think it's open 3 days a week, and whenever I drive by, that line is out of the parking lot, down the street, just as it was during the pandemic. And I know we can't fool ourselves to think that that moment is over and that people don't still have these needs. And I think what we've done, what I've tried to do as a legislator, support and bring and carry legislation that will provide tax relief, or provide more resources for our youth, and more resources to our nonprofits and to our county entities to provide the type of resources that we need to lift people up, to give them what they need to live and give them what they need to thrive.
Yeah, and thank you, Representative. I believe all that, and let's go volunteer together. I will follow up on that. I love to. It helps me to get out, in the field, honestly, to make sure I have a realistic view of what's happening. But the state, we spoke out with other members of the Hunger Relief Network, and I know you're in favor of this, but Al, you're right. This state's sitting on a more than $9 billion surplus. And we have people struggling to put food on their table for their families. That means kids are going to bed and school hungry. Hungry kids can't learn. This is the most vicious cycle we could ever have. What has it come to, honestly? And if there's one issue that can unify us, I think it's this one, honestly. And I'm going to work really hard to make sure that we make some progress in this upcoming session. I'm going to work really hard at the federal level too. The Farm Bill is coming up, Al.
Yeah.
And that's where all those nutrition components are, like SNAP and a lot of the other federal commodities programs. And so I work on a national level on that too, because it all makes a difference. But this needs to be part of the conversation. Most of the 2/3 of people who are visiting food shelves have chronic health conditions. So imagine if we have healthy, fresh food on those tables, and how much healthier everyone could be. That ties back to some other work I've done in my career, Al, which but there's so much, I try to be positive. I don't want to be political, but it is political at a point, Al, you're right. But there's so much we can do. We just raised $14 million to fight the racial hunger divide. We've spent $5 million this year. I'm going to keep going. We're going to do our part, and we need
talk more about the racial hunger divide.
Yeah. So thanks for putting that up. And there's also we're convening a conversation on Thursday, actually, about, you know, a more equitable future. I think part of my responsibility as a leader, as a white leader, is to listen and learn and help use our microphone to highlight other voices in this conversation and make sure we keep talking about this. So again, the racial hunger divide is the fact that communities of color face exponentially higher rates of hunger than their white neighbors. And we share our responsibility with this community to make that right. So it means opening our ears to listen, opening our minds to partnering in different ways and to new strategies, which we're diving into. It means sourcing different food, culturally specific food, sourcing from BIPOC farmers, so different sources of food. And it also means for us helping our neighbors navigate some of those programs that we know that work. And so our team at Second Harvest Heartland, ICE is the best team I've ever worked with, Al. And I'd put them up against anyone. I'm so proud of them. But we have taken record numbers of SNAP calls about SNAP, the SNAP program. So we're just flooded with interest in that. And so we're investing resources to make sure we have a navigation hub where people can access that help easier. That's part of our duty. But the SNAP program in particular, adds really to the stability, the longer term stability of a family. You know, we're giving out groceries and, you know, our partners are, but we need to look at some of those longer term solutions. And those are the harder conversations. Those cost a lot. We're going to invest our resources in the solutions that we know that work, and also finding new ones that we haven't ever thought of too.
Al, can I jump in?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I volunteered at the Camden Collective Fall Festival yesterday, and I brought a bunch of winter coats, and I volunteered at many places and handed out food and that sort of thing. The truth is, I shouldn't have to go buy coats. People shouldn't have to contribute to food shelves. People should have an income, should have a job, an income where they can buy essential stuff, food for their families. This is a political discussion. I think Minnesotans are good at rising to the occasion when there's a pandemic and coming together and, you know, putting money in a food shelf. But what are we doing to attack the systemic problems? That is really the big issue here, because we should not have any child in this state who goes to school hungry, any family that needs to go to a food shelf. So these are systemic conversations. Not just Band-Aids, where we need to put people in a position where they can afford to buy these things that many of the rest of us can buy.
And so, Al, maybe it's not, maybe my desire is, because it is a political conversation, maybe my desire is to make sure it's not a partisan conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll jump to that point, Allison, and Mary, thank you for sharing that perspective. But to that point, Allison, I think that's what when I opened up, I said those policies, those stimulus policies were bipartisan. It shouldn't be partisan. It shouldn't be partisan because at the end of the day, I believe the government should make the lives of people better. And so if you go with that focus and you're putting programs in place and you're putting the resources where they need to be to do that, that should not be a partisan issue. Everyone, if you're elected to represent the people and take care of the people, that should be what your job is and your end goal is at the end of the day. And that's I'll keep working hard toward that end. We just got to get everybody on board.
Yeah, thank you.
Allison, you're a lawyer too, right?
I am. Got a lot of lawyers, Al.
Tell your background. And your mom's a lawyer?
My mom's a lawyer. She's an arbitrator now.
Yeah.
It's like, you can't get away from us, Al. I really, I feel like I'm in great company, so I'm not bashing us. But I've lived my whole life in this community, and my dad and grandpa owned O'Toole Drug on 38th and Nicollet. Mm-hmm. Al, you remember that? I've known your family for a long time. And so grew up, and I live, a mile from George Floyd Square still. I have been part of this community and part of the system for a long time. I've been super privileged. And, you know, now in the position I'm in, I feel like it's my responsibility to help change things. I feel that super deeply. And so I've dedicated my career about 30 years now to helping Minnesota thrive and Minnesotans thrive. So, you know, I am a lawyer, so I spent time in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office a while ago, have worked for Senator Klobuchar, and also led MNsure, our state health insurance exchange, trying to give people access to health insurance. And that's where we crossed paths again, Al, because you helped us a lot in that way. And now I feel like, you know, it's sort of my career has come to a peak now that I'm leading Second Harvest Heartland during a global pandemic and record high inflation. So it just, you know, the intersection of hunger and health is at the front of my mind every day, in addition to equity and equitable solutions. So that really is what motivates me every day.
My friend David Rabb has put a note in asking the question, how do we assure accountability across the board? David Rabb, by the way, is an American hero, a veteran, a combat psychologist. That might not be the right word, but he led a psychological services unit to support combat troops in both Afghanistan and in Iraq. And is just a marvelous and wonderful, caring, compassionate human being and leader. So he asked the question, how do we assure accountability across the board? Where have we missed the boat in demanding and delivering accountability to everybody? Representative, start with you, and then Mary, then Allison, you answer that too, if you would.
What is he, when he, if I can have Mr. Rabb just elaborate a little bit on who specifically are we looking to hold accountable?
Well, I think the general question is, if people are elected to serve the residents of Minnesota, are people being served properly? And the answer is obviously no, because we have these huge and gaping disparities, and they're not one up. They've been around for a long time. So what does accountability have to do with how we operate, both in the public and private sector?
Well, one, from an elected official perspective, I think this is why it's so important for people to vote. I mean, in our democracy, your vote is your voice, and that's how you hold people accountable. If you've got an elected official that has made promises and those promises have not been kept, and they're endorsing or supporting policies that have been unequitable and detrimental to your community or to yourself, you need to make sure that the next time you don't vote for that individual, that you find and you support candidates that are going to be that are going to have the same values and moral vision that you have for yourself and for your community. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I ran, because I didn't think I always saw that in elected officials, not particularly from the folks that represented me. And I made sure I stayed close to them to push them, to hold them accountable. But that's what we need to do. In a representative democracy, we have the power as voters to move those individuals out, or at least make sure we push them in the direction we want them to go when we want something to happen in our communities and for our communities.
Mary, same thing.
Yeah, I want to thank Mr. Rabb for this question, because I think it's a critical component of the criminal legal system. I was really fortunate to have done commentary on the Chauvin trial. And one of my goals there was to make the system understandable and accessible for everyone, because it's my opinion that it's been made purposely mysterious so people can't ask good questions. And so throughout this campaign, it's been my goal to make the system understandable, because if you don't understand what's happening in your system, you can't ask the hard questions. You can't say, well, you're doing this. Is this actually working? When you can't even find out what this is because the policies aren't transparent. So this is critical. I think many people in the criminal legal system have forgotten they are public servants, that data is public, that there has to be transparency and accountability and accessibility so that they're listening to the community. And that's what I want to change. I want people in the community to say, or understand the system enough to say, well, what are you doing to address this? Or have you thought of that? Or can you show me the data for why this works? I need to be accountable to people. I need to work with people and listen. And I think that that's been missing. And I think it really isn't necessarily the fault of the community. It's really the fault of a system that's been mysterious and kept that way in many ways.
And so Allison is a leader of both state departments and also of a huge NGO initiative, the Second Harvest. What does accountability mean to you? How does it show up in your work and in your even professional ethics?
Yeah, well, I think, I'm a little bit differently situated than the state representative and Mary maybe, but I think it's our responsibility to hold ourselves accountable. And so, Al, when I think about, and I think these conversations help hold us accountable, the press helps us be accountable, all of these forces, voting, certainly. I also think highlighting issues like hunger, keeping that conversation relevant, and challenging us to do better. And so I think, when I think about hunger, and Representative Frazier, you said it should be nonpartisan. I totally agree. I think we all agree on that. So how about agreeing to huge goals for our community? How about cutting hunger in half in the by 2030? Mm-hmm. We're considering that. And considering, it's my job to put stakes in the ground and to challenge us. As a community, that's not a Second Harvest Heartland goal alone. It is our goal, but we can do so much better. And so part of it Al, is just personal motivation and holding yourselves accountable, holding each of our own selves accountable, but taking part in conversations that will challenge your thinking, and, bring about new solutions. So more to come on that, but, you can count me in on accountability, and I'm going to ask for everyone's help.
There we go. Listen, we're out of time. Great conversation. I want to close, though, by asking my friends, my writing partner, Brenda Lyle-Gray. Brenda, you've been, I think, backstage the entire time, but Brenda's going to be writing the story about this conversation. Any final questions, Brenda, or comments?
No, especially with Mary. I was so pleased with the last article that I did on her background and her passion and inspiration all over the interview. And I was just really, really pleased with just knowing about the work that she was doing. And Cedrick, so good meeting you. And I wish you the very best.
Allison, Brenda and I were in kindergarten together.
Oh my gosh.
We both are 75 now, so we go back a long ways, and we got a lot to talk about what we've seen in the world today. And that's kind of the fun and the joy of doing this program. She's living in New Mexico, in the mountains in New Mexico. So this is a chance for us to look at the whole world. But the context that we bring to this is what we thought about and expected of ourselves and of the world when we were 5. And we have that vision and that critique going forward to 2022 and beyond. Listen, thank all of you. Thank you, Diana Hawkins, and thank you, Dee Phillipps, my partners at Hawthorne, and thank you, Allison. Thank you, Moriarty, and thank you, Representative Cedrick Frazier. Good luck to everybody. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.